Hi, good morning, everybody. Welcome to our first class of the DevOps One-on-One series. We'll give it a couple of minutes to get some attendees in, and then we'll get started. All right, guys, let's start off with a few housekeeping messages. All of attendees will be muted, but we'll ask if you raise your hand, and we'll make sure that any questions you have, you can answer. If you'd rather not raise your hand, there's also a Q&A box where you can just ask your questions, and we'll make sure that it gets to our presenter. We will be recording, and we'll send you a copy of the recording tomorrow. Quick introductions. My name is Shannon Moorland. I am a demand generation coordinator here at Proudly, and your presenter for today will be Derek Black, who is the Director of Customer Experience here. And with that, I'll hand it over to Derek.
Yeah, sure. Shannon, yeah, all right. So is my screen showing now, or it should be
Me.
Yeah. Here we go. This should be the right one. There we go. All right, hi, I'm Derek Black. Director of Customer Experience here at Proudly. I've worked on, a lot of different customer problems and Salesforce implementations through the years, and today we're talking through just some basics of how to accomplish DevOps on the Salesforce platform. So the first piece of this is, I want to thank everyone for joining today. We're going to be introducing strategies that are used by best-in-class organizations to manage changes in Salesforce. And that kind of applies to this whole cycle here that you're seeing of application lifecycle management. DevOps, you can see, is the centerpiece of this, and that is kind of surrounded by release management. So DevOps is kind of the central technical construct of the overall ALM process, and that is used for release management to actually deliver new functionality to all of your end users. So I'm hoping to guide people in this course through the questions that need to be answered to find the optimal practices for ALM, release management, and DevOps. So there'll be a lot of kind of questions that I'll be asking everyone. We'll be asking for a little bit of participation to raise your hand here and there around different things that people are maybe doing today on the platform. And then through exploring answers to these questions, we'll come up with better ways to help you manage your Salesforce environment, kind of regardless of where you're at on your journey to best-in-class application lifecycle management and DevOps processes. And then after we kind of go through the questions that you need to answer to help yourself along on this journey, we'll go through what best-in-class looks like for all of these pieces of the puzzle. So today we're going to be focused on governance, and then there are other topics that we will hit on through this sequence of 5 courses. So why kind of governance? It's not really about setting up a bunch of rules and things to make your life difficult. It's really about these 3 key benefits of efficiency, security, and innovation. It really allows you the framework to understand, what work needs to be prioritized, how it can be done effectively, and be delivered to your end users successfully without any bugs or bumps in the roads. And it allows you to deliver this innovation. You can keep, giving them the latest and greatest if you have a good process in place for, managing the work of everything that goes into the application lifecycle. So with this, governance is really the only way a DevOps solution makes sense in Salesforce. So determining the rules of engagement for making changes will also define the technical processes that are part of DevOps. Establishing this framework is really essential for the most effective use of both your technological and your human resources. So, deciding how and why and when changes can be made will drive who can do them, what types of people you have available, and then potentially what types of supporting technologies like things like Prodly or things in the App Exchange that you may get in addition to whatever you're using inside of Salesforce. So your governance strategy will help you make the best choices for everything else in ALM and DevOps. So there are many ways to describe application lifecycle management phases. Plan, build, test, release is kind of a well-repeated mantra in these circles. But when we're tying ALM to DevOps, we're expanding it a bit more into granular pieces here that you see. So DevOps gets more detailed on the components of what it means to release, how you package, verify, and deploy changes that are on their way to your end users, or the way release becomes more of a sequence of steps rather than simply just pushing a change set into production. Here we've expanded release into packaging, integration and acceptance testing, and deploying to production. So all 6 of these phases are important to consider when building out an overall governance strategy for Salesforce or really any other application. This isn't necessarily limited to Salesforce. So the questions that you see in each of these boxes are important to be solidly answered to kind of determine the rules of engagement for introducing new features to your end users. So you have to have testing criteria to understand if something works or not. You have to who is allowed to push things to production and when, things like that. So we'll explore common answers and considerations to these questions through the session today as they apply to governance. And I'll be looking maybe for people to share bits of their own experience along the way, so we can have some more real life examples outside of what I may have seen myself. So when building your governance strategy, there are 4 key areas to consider. We'll go through options and requirements for all of these, and kind of hit the high notes here. So oversight and planning may seem a bit obvious or maybe even redundant when talking about governance, but for our purposes, we're talking about what goes into the prioritization and decision making around what work will actually get done. So choosing and deciding what user stories or what feature requests are most important, and developing a body to make those decisions the most effective way is the big piece of oversight here. We'll also talk about development methodology. So what types of strategies are used by organizations to most effectively get updates and new functionalities to their end users. So this will vary, and not every methodology fits every organization. So we'll talk a little bit about when and why you might want to be like a full agile shop, as you may have heard around development methodology, versus doing larger big bang waterfall type of projects. We'll then talk about release management strategy. So it's not simply a subcomponent of development methodology. It's a key piece to be considered in governance for DevOps. It will ensure safe and secure updates that are seen as enhancements rather than kind of unpredictable changes. This is how you take all the good stuff that is being built and make sure that it is delivered or released in a way that's easy to consume and issue-free. And then finally, we'll talk about audit and compliance readiness, which kind of discuss how to use the pieces of the puzzle from the other three components to ensure changes are made in a way that keeps your organization in line with security, privacy, and audit requirements. So some of this audit and compliance stuff could, inform decisions that you make in development methodology or release management strategy, and vice versa. So to kind of dive into this first piece of, oversight and planning, I'm curious, like how many people out there are, currently part of a center of excellence, or, familiar with what that, topic is, or, things like that. If there's anyone that would like to, raise their hand if they are part of a center of excellence or have built this somewhere else, that would be great. If not, I can just talk about how, I've been a part of these or had to kind of report into them, as a consultant. Shannon, I can't see the attendees list. I'm not sure if anyone has their hand raised for this or not.
No, I'm looking at it right now. I think no hands are raised.
Okay, cool. So, from my experience, a center of excellence at its most basic is an organizational body focused on prioritizing what is the most important work to be done within an application. So these can exist for, Salesforce, of course, or really any other software platform and enterprise business software. To be most effective, it should have representatives from end users as well as system administrators. So the people that are, demanding the most latest, greatest, coolest things to come out of the platform, as well as the people that need to build it. This body should meet regularly and determine what needs are most valuable to the business and balance expectations as to what can be delivered from a technical standpoint. Often a valuable side effect of having this board is documentation that is, needed to explain and prioritize changes that can live on as user or admin guides. So as, like a sales ops person that, needs certain numbers and metrics, kind of puts together a small bit of presentation of what they're looking for in type of like a spreadsheet, because it doesn't exist yet in Salesforce. That type of thing can, quickly go into requirements documentation, as well as live on eventually as that gets delivered as, how to best get the, the desired result of the feature and the function, which can go into, different training materials and things like that. So choosing some type of repository for keeping track of all these inputs as they become, potential outputs of what you're building is really important. So keeping track of the technical execution of the changes. So what are all the metadata components, data components that we had to update or improve to accomplish this new feature, as well as kind of what's in it for me stories for end users that can be used to better adopt whatever is being used, or potentially train new people into the organization on how they accomplish certain tasks or find specific information inside of Salesforce. All of this type of documentation and things that are being used in this oversight and building a center of excellence, it can really become a go-to resource for anyone to learn how to either best use an application, or for admins or developers to learn why certain decisions were made, and build and understand how they can more quickly improve different things there. So a high functioning COE, Center of Excellence, not only gets the best functionality to its end users, it can aid in training and onboarding all types of resources that touch the application. So once a Center of Excellence has been established and you have kind of the right mix of contributors, you have your biggest squeaky wheel from sales management, you have your Salesforce management team that is kind of doling out work to admins and developers, or maybe that is all just one person. You are the manager, the developer, the admin. Once that's kind of in place, it's necessary to align on how to incorporate all these changes or features that are being requested in. So what I recommend is creating some type of system to formally log feedback and change requests. This is the best way to understand what changes will mean the most to your user base. So when reviewing and discussing requests, it's important to be able to estimate the time, skill level needed to complete the requests. Is one of the asks potentially too hard for what we can do with our team right now? Do we need to bring in outside resources, consultants, something like that? As well as understanding the other side of that. Are things super easy and quick wins? So by having a balance and being able to rank things as not only priority but risk and difficulty to implement, this will allow you to throw in those kind of easy, low risk effort tasks to be picked up out of a backlog when there's extra development time and you're spending stuff on super large effort things that are high priority. So by having some type of intake system to have end users log problems they're having, features requests, that's key for an overall kind of oversight and planning strategy. At Prodly, we have our own dashboard for this. We have our own way that our end users can log their own feature requests, and we have records for that in Salesforce that manage everything in a nice dashboard to take care of this. So some way that you collect this is important for your governance process. So when you can report on it, it's really easy to understand when these initiatives can be delivered. So by building out something like this in Salesforce, you can make reports and dashboards that help you understand what is the bandwidth to add in something that's super urgent emergency, and then what is going to fall on the wayside if we suddenly prioritize something over work that's in flight. So by having this kind of oversight mechanism and understanding what's going to go into every single piece of work, it'll help you improve on forecasting on how long you can execute and turn around projects, no matter the size of the project itself. So after we have talked a bit about the oversight piece and getting your user stories and getting your center of excellence done, you're going to have to maybe decide on a development methodology here. So I have a feeling this topic will be very familiar to most people on the call already, The word agile can be very triggering to a lot of people, so I'll try not to use it too much. Here I have 3 common approaches to Salesforce development that we'll discuss, but there are a lot of other varieties out there, and really they're all kind of different spins on these 3 examples. So the first one, a true agile methodology, is best suited for software development. It's great for when work items can be completed mostly independently and merged into a master code base with a little trouble. The only way I've really seen true agile methodology work in Salesforce is when there's maybe just one admin. So they, of course, are pushing fully reviewed and completed work into production as soon as it's cleared testing, because it's just the one person that's doing everything. Agile can also maybe be incorporated into teams where you have a lot of actual developers and you have features or processes that are being implemented that are really just a lot of Apex coding. So you can, of course, check in and out Apex code into something like Azure, which is very common in Salesforce, people using VS Code and things like that. So Agile can be used in some constructs, and it's really, the benefits of Agile are that you get the latest and greatest as soon as possible, but you really need some strong, organization there, and you need people who can work independently without worrying about, conflicts of what other people are maybe working on. Waterfall is kind of bemoaned and derided methodology by implementation experts these days, but the truth is this is how most Salesforce teams are working today. They are working on large projects to be completed like in a full copy sandbox where there are 4 or 5 admins, developers working together. There's lots of dependencies needed, as you know, like it's really easy to, step on each other's toes or, simultaneously be creating platform automations that are maybe updating or doing different things to the same fields. So a lot of these dependencies and work needs to be completed and synchronized, but there's only like one big push to production. So all of that, collaborative, messy work that's kind of being done in one full copy sandbox, it's probably best that you kind of package this when you have, something substantial and you're really clear that, multiple people's work is complete and you've kind of finished a big project. So these infrequent but regular and large pushes to production are sometimes welcomed by organizations as they don't really want to disrupt their end users. They want to maybe do like a monthly or quarterly update or training of, hey, here's what's new and here's how you use everything, rather than small, pieces coming through and maybe not being explained very well, or maybe your sales team is not necessarily super attentive to, blurbs and things coming through about, hey, here's like the new features we delivered this week. This is good for people that, just want to kind of control the pace of what's being pushed to production. The other methodology I want to talk about today is adaptive methodology. It's kind of a middle ground methodology between Waterfall and Agile, and it's what Salesforce Services uses. So I used to be a solution architect at Salesforce and worked on hundreds of projects, and this is the methodology Salesforce recommends and uses themselves. It blends, these agile concepts of frequently deployed sprints and continual requirement updates with the kind of steadiness of predictable and repeatable waterfall releases. So the way this works is admins and devs are focused on build work and submit like completed user stories from their sprints into a merge org. So every 2 weeks, 3 weeks, sometimes 1 week, however long you want to define your sprint cycle, they're getting new work to start on and complete and move it into a merge org. At the same time, you can, kind of be agile and update changing requirements as they may be and allow you to respond more quickly to, changing business needs. But the adaptive framework changes a little bit in how things get pushed to production. It waits for kind of an accumulation of sprints, usually 3 or 4 sprints will be completed before a deployment is done. So this pairs really well with testing strategies too. So you can make sure that a lot of stuff that is being done in dev orgs or scratch orgs by individual contributors on the project is merged into, you know, like a systems integration testing org or sandbox for that. That is then packaged by a release manager, and it can be easily moved to user acceptance testing where, you know, they're not doing these super granular one-off types of tests and taking them, you know, out of their day job for, you know, small tasks. They can be concentrated on larger pieces of the puzzle, and it can lead to better satisfaction with deployments to production. So in all, like all these methodologies can be successful. The key part is having a discussion in regards to governance is to set expectations for, you know, story management, documentation, testing, and releases. By choosing your methodology, you're going to have different frequencies of updating and pushing work items and understanding, you know, how often your center of excellence needs to meet. And it may dictate needs for automations and systems in the overall process. If you're going to be true agile, you're going to want to start looking into version control systems and like true CI/CD, continuous integration, continuous deployment, you know, strategies using things like Salesforce DevOps Center or Jenkins or, you know, other automated tools to make sure that the latest and greatest is always continually getting pushed forward. Or maybe you're just going to, you know, stick with change sets and, you know, doing stuff kind of predictably, repeatably, you know, once a month, something like that. And of course, that will inform how frequently you need to get together and talk about what is going into the bucket of work that your Salesforce team is going to be delivering. So the next piece of this that we want to talk about is environment management strategy. So, you know, I would like to maybe get an idea, are people using scratch orgs? I don't know if you can see who's raising hands or not, but if there are people using scratch orgs and you could raise your hands, that would be great. And Shannon, you can let me know if anyone's doing that.
I see one. One of them is using scratch orgs right now.
Okay. So one person is using scratch orgs. And that's great. Scratch orgs are going to be the go-to environment that people are going to do all Salesforce development in. And it's going to be a few years. So we saw the trend, wow, I'm getting old. It was maybe like a decade ago to push people to Lightning. That probably started in like 2012, 2013. They released it. They're like, hey, this is a cool new way to, you know, build things in Salesforce and, you know, get more, you know, performance out of the platform. And it probably took a good, you know, 5-6 years after that was released to really get everyone up to date and using Lightning. I know there's still some orgs out there using Classic. We're going to see something very similar with the push to using scratch orgs. There's going to be some paradigm shifts of like entrenched behavior of doing everything in a full copy. And there's going to be some better expansions to the Salesforce platform. But things like DevOps Center and App Exchange tools like Prodly, organizations will be able to, you know, adopt more common DevOps principles to a platform that has not been super DevOps friendly. So scratch orgs are the way that Salesforce is really kind of embracing that they need to be closer to like a software development platform and be able to cover DevOps principles. And the big piece that scratch orgs have in that and DevOps principles are the idea of doing everything like in a feature branch. So when you have a new work item, you would create a dev org or a scratch org and just create a new org for one simple thing that you want to get done. So another question around this is like environment management and usage. Who here maybe has more than maybe 20 unused developer sandboxes right now? and raise your hand if that's true for your org. And Shannon, you can let me know if that's true for anyone in the audience.
Yeah, I'm definitely seeing a couple that are raising their hands that say they have a lot of unused dev environments.
Yeah, for sure. And that's been my experience, seeing how people are doing things in Salesforce, that there's often lots of these free environments just sitting on the shelf, ready to be used, that are, for a variety of reasons, maybe not being taken advantage of by the organization. A primary reason could be like inefficient environment strategy. And of course, Salesforce does make it somewhat difficult to get a lot of value out of these orgs. It can take a long time for them to be created. They don't have any data in them. We just shy away from using these dev orgs, and oftentimes work in a full copy or a partial copy because it has data. It looks kind of like prod. We're not going to be surprised by what we get out of it. This is the hardest I'm going to flex on, like using Prodly today, but if you have a tool like Prodly, you can easily expand the value of those environments to be as easy to use as full copies and have the rich data that you need to start a project. It eliminates kind of clicking new over and over again on like account and contact and opportunity and things like that in Salesforce. So people can be up and running with real data inside of a dev org or a scratch org, and be able to do their work in peace, not have other people overwriting or working on automations on the same object, those types of things. So by adopting and using more dev and scratch orgs, it really allows work to be better compartmentalized. It is much easier to merge these things, and it really helps with your release process as well. So dictating where work can start is a big piece of governance. So the environment management strategy as it pertains to governance is you're going to say, hey, you know what, we can't just start every project in our full copy. We really need to follow some of these principles here that are recommended by Salesforce, that developing and doing unit testing for new pieces of functionality that happens in a dev org or a scratch org. And then when that contributor, the admin or developer, finishes that piece of work and they say, hey, this looks good to me, they can push it into something like a dev pro box or a partial copy, where the components as they're getting done, like in an adaptive methodology, those will all be collected by someone kind of playing a release manager role, where they're going to decide all of the good stuff that is ready to be released. They'll package that into a release. They'll push that to potentially a full copy sandbox for further testing, to make sure there's not any regressions, to make sure that the package was built correctly and you're going to get everything that you intended to before it goes to prod. And then after kind of that regression and smoke testing stuff has been done, you can move to user acceptance testing, potentially in the same box, or you might have a dedicated org for that as well. And then after everything passes testing, you'll move that to production. I think I maybe skipped ahead a little bit to what we're going to talk to next, which is the release management strategy. But if development methodology dictates the frequency of releases, and environment management dictates where the work will originate, the path to production and how environments are kept in sync for parallel development, or if you're just kind of a one-man shop, just understanding the impact of your releases, then release management strategy deals with how quality work is delivered to users safely. So in general, we want to be in the enhancement business, not in the random changes business. So work items should pass testing and approval before they're deployed. Otherwise you risk breaking things or introducing, problems into production, which you never want. So, understanding what is, approved to be released is good for overall stability of your platform, as well as it can feed back into some audit and compliance needs. So by having, yes, this was built on this day, it includes these components, it passed unit testing, it passed regression testing, you have all that kind of backlog and audit information that you might need for compliance reasons, or just to revert something if for whatever reason, even though it passed all this testing, something went wrong when it was deployed to production. You also don't want to disrupt your users' workflow by dropping new surprising changes into them. So for the end users, a good release management strategy, as well as understanding if you need training or documentation to go with what's packaged in the release, will make their lives better. And another thing to take note of is even best-in-class orgs, mistakes will happen. What separates best-in-class orgs from average is how quickly you can resolve these things and have a hot fix strategy in place, or production support environment, something like that. That would be part of your release management strategy as well. And it kind of bleeds into environment management strategy, that you might want to have something in place and planned for when things do go wrong. And by having that in place, you can quickly react to anything that does go wrong. And finally, releases should just be non-events. They should happen the same way every time. And if you have a good strategy in place here, you can really open the door for a lot of automation. This is how people kind of jump to that Agile CI/CD workflow, is that they've just figured out what's acceptable to be released and how it can be released. And then it becomes almost robotic. And then at that point, you can make someone not have to, stay up late on a Friday night pushing stuff into production. You can have, a process that does this for you automatically. So kind of the last thing that I wanted to cover before we get into what best in class looks like for, all these different pillars that we talked about, is audit and compliance. The needs for audit logs and compliance information, it's going to vary widely from company to company. The best advice is you always want to have a little bit more coverage than you actually need. So for some industries, you'll need a certain chain of documentation from when the request came in to when it was basically created as a work item or a user story, and then how that progressed through testing and build, and then approvals for it to be deployed. So it's important to take stock of when and where you may need to provide change logs or ensure that sensitive data is not being shared with admins or contractors. Change logs can be also just as helpful for troubleshooting and maintenance, as well as compliance needs. So if you can easily track changes, track the source of changes, you're more likely to quickly find where bugs may have been introduced into production. So these are some questions that you'll want to ask yourself around, what are you trying to be covered on? SOX compliance is a big piece of this, where any changes to pricing or things that can potentially impact commercial deals needs an audit trail. One area where Proudly works closely with that is that SOX auditors are catching on to the fact that data in CPQ actually does drive, of course, beyond the obvious price book entries and things like that. There is a lot of configuration data that's not necessarily metadata that needs to be logged, and we provide audit logs of who deployed what and when and where it came from, what changed, that can be useful for these types of audits. So now that we've kind of talked about all the things to think about and consider, I'm going to hit on what best in class looks like for all these types of areas. So for oversight and planning, of course, you need to build this center of excellence. You need some type of system for collecting feedback from end users. So if you're doing all this work on Salesforce, highly recommend that you have something inside of Salesforce where people can give immediate kind of real-time feedback. So creating something like a feature request object or a bug inquiry type of thing that can just some type of record in Salesforce where people can generate a new thing that they know is going to be looked at by someone. Sometimes people even just use the case object inside of Salesforce. So deciding on some type of system for this, maybe you have a larger system that covers more than just Salesforce in place at your organization. You need this in place to get what problems you're getting from the field, as well as their representation and management from the Center of Excellence. You need to have user guides and admin guides that are published and updated regularly. So these are going to be the outcomes of your releases. As things are being shipped to production, you need to wrap up kind of in a bow, like what happened, and then what is the impact for the admin? How do they go and unwind or enhance something that was just built? And how do your users go and take advantage of these things if that's needed? You also want a system for managing a backlog. This could be effectively the same system for collecting the feedback. So if you're using records in Salesforce, your end users will have one view of them where they can create and generate and see what's going on there. And then maybe there's a more sophisticated view or dashboard for the Salesforce team to understand, here's the 20 things we've heard this month that need to be fixed. Here are the 15 things we actually have time to work on. Here are the 200 things that are sitting in a backlog to get around to later. And then you can prioritize through the Center of Excellence process to decide what work gets assigned. And then you want to rate all of your requests for a level of effort and a risk. Not necessarily just urgency, but having these is important to understand, what type of resources are we going to need to accomplish this? And then if something is very low risk, like what type of rigor do we need to do in testing? If something is, come in as basically like a defect in production and it's super low risk, you might have a shorter path. You might do that in your hotfix or production support org rather than pushing it, all the way through SIT, UAT to production. So understanding a risk level and then having paths for development dependent on the risk level is a good way to be more agile, for lack of a better word. And best-in-class development methodology. You want to decide on a methodology that best serves the end users. It can be tempting to make sure that you're, doing what you want to do as an admin or developer, but you want to make sure that the methodology is going to be something that is going to be, well received by who you're actually doing the work for. So it's not necessarily about you. So, deciding on Agile when, someone noted in the chat that they have over 4,000 users, it might not be the best to be continually updating stuff all the time for that many users, or maybe it is. You want to take that lens when deciding on what to choose. Regardless of release frequency, you want to build work assignments in a feature branch. So that kind of ties in a little bit to the environment management strategy. But this is best, especially if you're using like dev orgs and scratch orgs, where you can quickly create an environment to do one kind of unit of work and then move on from it. If you have this in place where you are moving to like an agile or adaptive methodology. Best in class organizations will have some type of continuous development strategy and a tool set in place for it. So typically that will mean that they're using some type of version control, and along with this, like your feature branches are set up on demand or ahead of demand, like you have pools of dev sandboxes that are ready to use as people need them, rather than clicking new sandbox and sometimes you have to wait 2 or 3 days. Just do that in advance. If you have 20, 30 sandboxes that are sitting there not being used, just have someone go in every Monday morning and click new a few times to make sure you have the latest greatest copy of production or whatever your source you want to use to start that up. Maybe you're using UAT to get what's been delivered most recently, but not necessarily in prod. You want to have some type of strategy to have those environments ready, and then some type of strategy to get what is out of those kind of as quickly as possible. Release management strategy, this is probably the heaviest one of what we're talking about here for best in class and how this applies to governance. You need to embrace testing or deal with testing, or however you feel about testing, but regression testing and UAT are a part of each release. This is what best in class people are doing. Feature branch work is merged in a version control system. So while I'm in the previous slide suggesting that everything starts in a feature branch, best in class orgs are using a version control system to merge in this work, resolve any conflicts if they come up, and then have that in a repository, and then push that to your testing org to make sure that it works after it's been kind of compiled. These merge releases are delivered to testing environments by your release manager. Anything that fails testing gets sent back to a feature branch for fixes. So it's like, hey, go redo this. Some of the cases you'll send it back to the org where that work started. Other scenarios, you may just create another new scratch org to do it over. Components of a release all have a testing history and approval history. You have some type of continuous integration strategy and tool set in place. So something that can, package these things. Maybe you're using Salesforce DX with unlocked packages. Maybe you're using, Prodly to move your metadata and configuration data. And you have documentation delivered and updated for admins and users. If something does actually require training or some type of adoption exercise to make sure people are using this cool new thing you built for them, they know about it, you'll potentially want a dedicated training environment. You'll also want, hot fix and exception paths environments for things that are, super urgent, or things that are bug fixes that can be continually refreshed. And I have refreshed in quotation marks here because you can use data and metadata tools to update the data and metadata in an org without necessarily doing a Salesforce refresh that will wipe out everything. You want to have strategies in place to manage getting the latest and greatest config or the most recent and urgent bug replicated outside of production, so you're not making changes directly into production. And finally, full copy sandboxes are refreshed as frequently as possible when you have a best-in-class release management strategy. None of these, well, if we refresh this, we're going to break integrations to other platforms that we use for testing. You want to have a strategy that avoids that scenario where everything that's integrated can survive a refresh, and you're not worried about overwriting people's work because it's languishing in a full copy. It should be in a feature branch, not sitting in a testing org. Finally, around best in class, we have some info around audit and compliance. What I'm seeing as best in class here is all needed audit information is known well before changes are started. So if you're dealing with, personally identifiable information and you need to mask that or something, that that's an important part of compliance, and that you need to make sure that you're not exposing or editing that in certain ways. Or if you are working on something and you're changing, things that might impact pricing, sales, accounting, different things there, you need to know what needs to be taken track of for your, audit needs. You want to kind of follow this path of request user story to release. You want to have that documented with approval and testing history. So that's a hot thing for people that are maybe in publicly traded companies or pre-IPO. How do we have this ready for when we're publicly traded, or how do we kind of go back and cover up areas where maybe we weren't being as diligent as we should have been? Configuration data changes are managed just like metadata changes. So you have a trail of understanding when big data loads or updates are happening, like who did those, where did the data come from? Proudly allows you to do this without bringing data out of the cloud. You can get in a lot of trouble if you have CSVs on desktops as kind of your source of truth for where data is coming from. You want to try to avoid that and have a tool set in place that will be able to log the changes and show when the data was updated. And best in class for this is to just have a source control system in place. This will allow you to point directly to your repository as often as possible. Say, hey, like all the changes were approved and pushed by release manager out of this repository, and if you need to, you can roll back to something that's more stable, or something that was fully approved. For some reason something got pushed that wasn't approved. So that's kind of the 4 areas that we want to talk about, what best in class looks like. And next up, we're going to talk about how to implement these strategies, these things that you want to consider when building your governance framework of rules of how you do all these things and what the requirements are. Next, in 2 weeks, we're going to talk about environment management. So how to kind of live this dream I've been talking about of doing things in a feature branch, how to use more of those unused dev orgs, or how to start using stretch orgs and have the functionality in them that you're comfortable with, maybe in partial or full copy sandboxes. After that, we'll talk about release management. So after you've learned to maybe do some more tricks with environments, what does it mean for packaging, and what's best in class for moving these things up the path until they hit production. We'll have a bit deeper dive on release management concerning CI/CD and version control. So continuous integration, continuous deployment, how that works with a VCS system, and how that can be incorporated into Salesforce. And then on May 5th, we'll talk about testing and what does that mean? What are some tools out there that can help you do this? And what are some standards you should look to have for testing inside of Salesforce for your releases? So as part of this too, I'm offering kind of myself up to do a free change management audit. So these are, one-on-one time with me or potentially other people at Proudly who have kind of seen and heard it all and can help people kind of just move one level up or improve one aspect of your overall change management process. You can set up time with me to go through where you're at, and I can give you recommendations on maybe what the next step is for your organization, and get more in depth and detailed specifically around what your needs are, what you're maybe trying to learn here. And if there are any questions or anything like that, we still have a few minutes left to go over anything.
Not a lot is coming up, so I think maybe we can wrap it up. As Derek said, if you're ready to kind of dive deep and see how these actually apply to you and how you can make those changes to improve yourself, feel free to reach out to me at esmore@portly.co or go to that website and sign up and we'll be in touch. For this, I think we can call it a day, and I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll hope to see you again in 2 weeks.
Yeah, thanks, everyone.
Thank you, guys.